Engage for ESG webinar regarding the Engage templates. Today with me, if you can move to the next slide, please. We're going to have a couple of persons that have been directly involved in the construction of the templates themselves. And so we have Vincent Maillet from Hyperport. He's the head of energy efficiency and regulatory technology. And together also we are going to have Gianluca Ginelli, who's structured finance data manager at European Data Warehouse. But first, before dwelling into the webinar itself, just a quick recap of the previous webinar that was on the 25th of March. At the link below, you can see all the previous slides. In terms of earlier, what we have been discussing is really the Commission delegated regulation on the regulatory technical standards on the principal adverse impact for STS. We're actually expecting this to be published in the official journal pretty soon. And also we have been looking into the disclosures delegated act, in particular the Article 8 of the Taxonomy, as well as the ECB Climate and Natural Plan of 2024-2025 within its roadmap. But most important, I think one of the things that we will address today is really the approval of the revised energy performance of buildings directive by the European Parliament, and we are going to have today quite a specific session on this. So if we look at the agenda of today, that is in the next slide, really we are going to look at what are the part which are relevant also for the Engage for ESG initiative in terms of the energy performance of building directive. Clearly that will need to be ratified by the member states, but Vincent will give us quite a high level overview. Most importantly, also, we are going to explain, thanks to Gianluca, the Engage templates, in particular the sample files, i.e. how you can compile and what are the examples that we are providing in terms of the templates themselves. And then last but not least, I will delve into how you can become a pilot in the Engage for ESG initiative. There is a specific process and the procedures, and then we're going to leave it at the end for any questions and answers that the person have. Important, this session is being recorded, and also the slides will be made available afterwards on the Engage for ESG initiative website. So in terms of the initiative itself, what the initiative is focusing on, if you can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, is we are looking into how to contribute to the goals of the Green Deal, in particular focusing into the sustainable investments in the building sector. We are focusing specifically on residential mortgages, but also on the home renovation loans. So what we have produced so far, particularly thanks to Vincent and Gianluca, the first version of the Engage templates that was released at the end of the last year. And this basically allowing the institutions to disclose the alignment of their mortgages with the EU taxonomy requirement, in line with the substantial contribution criteria of the Climate Delegated Act, together with the specific activities for the acquisition and the ownership of real estate, and as well as the minimum safeguards. So what are the templates? What is the purpose of the templates? Well, they enable the assessment and the degree of the sustainability of the mortgages and the classification of certain mortgages as sustainable, as according to the taxonomy. Most importantly, the templates will also be updated and expanded over time, also to include and incorporate the most relevant European sustainability regulations and developments, and some of them we will talk about very shortly on the EPBD4. But importantly also, the second pillar of the initiative is not only the templates, but also a specific Engage portal, which is the infrastructure that is currently under development through a specific working package. So in the next slide, we see high level the initiative, the high level concept of the initiative. You can see that the initiative seeks to comply not only with the taxonomy, but also with the General Data Protection Regulations, so the GDPR, and as well as the EPBD. And there are the two, and in this schema we show the two main deliverables, i.e. the templates together with the guiding documentation, as well as the taxonomies, and the specific the engage portal, which is going to be the one that is going to collect the data. So as I was mentioning earlier, we have two official pilots, one from Spain, UCI, and the other one from the Netherlands, WONU, which is part of NN Bank. And these are the ones that are going to be officially producing and let's say sending the information, but we are seeking to have other pilots which are outside the two formal ones from across the countries. And clearly this initiative will benefit the borrowers and also investors in the mortgage space. In the next slide, I wanted to here highlight what is the genesis of the engaged templates, and particularly the setup. And we basically looked at when we created the templates the most used loan by loan reporting standards, and that is the current ESMA underlying exposure reporting standards under Article 7, and in particular two type of annexes of the disclosures under Article 7, and those are the ones under Annex 2, and the other for the mortgages, and the other one for the consumer loans, which is Annex 6. Annex 6. This one is consumer loan, clearly for renovation purposes. So far, in terms of the building block one, which is the one that we have partly delivered, we have already included the taxonomy regulation compliance for mortgages for the acquisition of new buildings and existing buildings. We are currently working on the loans for the renovation of the existing ones. But as I was mentioning earlier, the templates are constantly evolving. We'll probably also include some funds like the Elena funds, which are provided from the European investment banks in terms of the helping to finance the renovation wave. But and not only this, we are looking into potentially including fields that are related to the climate change, in particular to flooding and heating, as part of the stress tests that are published from the European central banks, and these are related to the building stock. Going back to the engaged templates, in terms of the structure of the templates and the information which is included, you have the templates themselves, which are in Excel files. Then you have also the guiding documentation, which is important in order to be able to compile the templates themselves. But we also have the sample files, the ones that my colleague Gianluca will explain to you in a minute in terms of how they are built and what type of samples you can then send. In order to obtain the templates, there is a process, and you need to send a request through the link that is at the bottom of the page. Last but not least, I was mentioning before, we have a series of webinars. If you can move to the next slide, thanks. This is the second one, but we have two upcoming ones where we are gonna, on the 29th of May, for example, we are gonna focus more on the portal, and also towards the 20, and another one on the 25th of June. The schedule is gonna change because we're gonna move them from the afternoon to the morning at 10 o'clock. You can register at the link to the two remaining workshops. Now moving to the next part, please. Yeah, I would like to leave the floor to Vincent so that he can give us an update in terms of the revised energy performance of buildings directive.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. I'll share my my slides. So I would like to start out with maybe an update on EPBD 4, but maybe before we go into EPBD number 4, maybe for some of us who are relatively new to that, explain what the EPBD is and what is the latest version, the current version. So the EPBD is an abbreviation for the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and basically it amounts to having a European building regulation or building law. And typically this directive and its previous 3 versions, it prescribes one, basically the building regulations for member states to implement. Second, the EPC methodology to implement to some degree. What is important is to notice that it is a directive and not a regulation. So member states all have quite a lot of degrees of freedom on how they want to implement this regulation or this directive in their national regulations. Typically, this will be the building codes, but also the system for the EPC methodology. And of course, this can differ per country, but also in some countries it can differ within jurisdictions. So the last version that basically needed to be implemented by the end of 2020 was EPBD 3. And one of the key elements in that piece of regulations was the near zero energy buildings definition, so the NZEB criteria. This is also a key component that is used in the EU taxonomy. What we'll see in the coming slides is that we have a new version of the EPBD with basically new sets of provisions, rules, but also a sincere broadening of the scope, because now it's not only building regulation and EPC methodology that are prescribed, but also it has provisions for financial instruments and member states to become carbon neutral before 2050. The important thing is that the EPBD is very much linked towards the EU taxonomy, and specifically the Climate Delegate Act. That is important, of course, for the EU taxonomy assessment when we look into the criteria. Specifically for buildings, just to give a few examples, give you here in some of the next slides. Skip this one. I have here 2 examples of the EU taxonomy, where you see, for instance, here the substantial contribution criteria for new buildings in 7.1 and the criteria for renovations. And as you see highlighted in purple, you see that there's a direct link towards the EPBD, albeit here in its more formal reference, legal reference with a directive number. So these 2 are very much interlinked. So it was for us very interesting when we found the final wording of the new EPBD version. This was published on the 12th of April. I must say it was quite a somewhat controversial piece of regulation. Well, at least for some member states. So if you compare what has been published to the previous versions, it has been very much watered down on some elements. But I must say they did manage to pass it through during the Belgian presidency this period, because there were also some concerns that it might be postponed until after the next EU election. So here we have it, and I think there are some really interesting parts in this regulation. So without going too deep in it, we'll just give in this short presentation a general overview of what the elements are that are contained in the EPBD4. We would need a lot more time to dig in all the details, but that's not the purpose of this presentation. It's just to give an overview of what elements are contained in this directive. And it starts out by, as I mentioned, a very much widening of the scope. So let's say compared to the previous version, which were very much based on micro rules for buildings or building units, now the EU Green Deal regulation is enshrined in the EPBD4. And basically, you could already say that probably the most important sentence in this directive is listed here on your top left, is that the complete European Union needs to be climate neutral by 2050 at latest. And as you can imagine, this has also some impact on buildings and therefore specifically on the energy performance for buildings directive. So how does it do that? Well, with a lot of tools basically. But a few that are, I think, worth mentioning is instead of the previous NZEP definition that we also apply in the EU taxonomy assessment, a renewed definition is put forward, and that is the zero emission building, or ZEB. So basically, we drop the N of near, and so it's now a definition of zero emission buildings. And what this means is that a zero emission building is a building with very low energy demand, zero on-site carbon emission from fossil fuels, and zero or very low amount of operational greenhouse gas emissions. I think this is a very important element here, what a zero emission building is, because this is slightly different from a zero energy building that is used in NZEP. There the E is for energy, and here the E stands for emissions. And emission is a little bit broader in scope compared to emissions, because we now have to take into account on-site carbon emissions and operational greenhouse gas emissions. So basically, all new buildings should be zero emission buildings by 2030 at latest. So this should be implemented by all 27 member states. And all existing buildings, including the ones that you are in now, should be transferred into zero emission buildings by 2050 at latest. There are some escapes for this, for instance, if it's a monument, but apart from that, all buildings will be subject to this. Just a few examples that we can find in basically analyzing the wording of EPBD4. There are a lot of references towards the EU taxonomy 2028-52, which is the official link towards the EU taxonomy. But more specifically, also it is specifically mentioned that the technical screening criteria will need to be applied, for instance, towards buildings, and more specifically towards renovations. So here on the top part of your screen, you see, for instance, what we have highlighted here from the final wording in blue. Building renovations will need to comply with unified minimum energy performance standards, and these should be typically in line with the EU taxonomy criteria related to building renovation activities. Also, you see in the same sentence or in the same paragraph that the 30% criterion is referred to, that we know from criteria 7.2. So you see here a lot of examples of this very direct link. Also, this has some impact not only on the criteria, but also on, and I think that's very crucial for our scope, the data that is needed. So one of the elements of EPBD4 is that, for instance, the EPC, so the Energy Performance Certificate, should include all necessary data required for the calculation of the energy performance of the building. Now, this is a particularly interesting comment because when it comes to the renovation criteria, these can be, let's say, tricky or somewhat challenging to apply in practice. So member states have 24 months to implement the EPBD4 in their national regulation. And basically one of the elements is that now, they have a hard commitment that we also need the necessary data elements to check if the EU taxonomy renovation criteria are applied, and also if the data elements are available. So another element here I think is very interesting, because data availability is, I think, a very crucial topic in a lot of member states. And that's also what we learned in talking to a lot of the financial institutions. So one of the elements here, which are basically responsibilities that the member states will need to implement within 24 months, I think is very interesting. And it's the sentence that member states shall ensure easy and free of charge access to the full energy performance certificate for building owners, tenants, managers, and to financial institutions as regards the building in their investment and lending portfolio. So I think this could potentially be interesting for a lot of people that are working on, let's say, proving EU taxonomy alignment and also encounter challenges in the data. So yeah, yes, there are, I think, some useful elements here that member states will need to implement. So there are many elements in the EPBD itself. I just try to highlight a couple here, and I already left some of the less relevant articles for us out of this picture. And just to trying to make sense of it, which goes probably too deep for a short high-level overview presentation. I do want to point out a couple of elements that are relevant depending on, let's say, your point of view or the scope that you are looking at. So out of these articles, there are typical, well, let's say certain articles that are in particular relevant when looking, for instance, into the criteria for new buildings. So we already discussed the new definition of zero emission buildings. Well, this is particularly relevant if you look into Article 7. And if you look into that, you also have an obligation that you have to include, for instance, solar energy in your building. There are provisions that you need to implement also technical systems or smart readiness indicators for buildings so that it becomes a smart building. But also an element that we touched upon for zero emission building is that we need to look at the carbon life cycle and the carbon emissions. How do you calculate this? How should these be implemented on a member state level? Well, this is prescribed in some of the annexes. So in this case, Annex 3. So just without going too deep, it highlights a little bit of trying to make sense which articles are relevant basically for which question or which scope you are looking at. Another relevant one, I think, for us is renovations. So basically there are criteria for renovations that are very much focused on the member states, and there are articles that are relevant for more the users on a micro level, like a building owner or the financial institution. So yes, the governments will need to come up with a national building and renovation plan. Member states are incentivized to introduce a renovation passport, which is very interesting also from a data perspective, and has a link also to the one-stop shops that EPBD4 proposes. So yeah, you see that some of these articles, depending a little bit on the way you look at it, are very much interconnected. I must say, for renovations, probably one of the most important, or I should say the most important article of the EPBD itself is probably Article 9, and also the most controversial one, because this prescribes what renovations should look like, let's say on a micro level, but also on a member state level, because basically it prescribes certain pathways that member states will need to implement to ensure that every building becomes a zero emission building within 25 years, as is now enshrined by law as of 12th of April. We'll look into that in a minute. But what is really relevant, I think, is let's say, this gap that we have between today and the coming 2 years, because there are a lot of elements that member states will need to implement, and just highlight a couple of them here. So whether it's basically the national building renovation plan, update their EPC methodology, make available for free and extended the database for energy performance certificates, whether it's let's say incorporating new energy performance requirements, cost optimum requirements as prescribed in Annex 7. You could say there's really a lot of homework for member states, and I would really incentivize everyone to have a look at it, and also to follow basically how this is implemented in your member states. And again, also from an EPC energy performance certificate data perspective or methodology perspective, there are many articles, and I must say also some additional forthcoming delegated acts that are being introduced in the coming 12 months. So a lot will happen there. So naturally, in many conversations, I've noticed that, yeah, people in the financial industry are not that inclined to look into building law. But yeah, as you can see, there are a lot of elements here that touch upon financial institutions, energy performance, but also more directly, and I think that's the next slide here, elements with respect to green mortgages, or as they call them, energy efficient mortgages. So these are specifically mentioned that member states will have an obligation to incentivize energy efficient mortgages, but also renovation loans, national guarantee schemes. Quite some freedom is left to the member states themselves on how they want to incorporate it. But again, I think this is very interesting because they are all interconnected, specifically for renovations going forward. So I wanted to keep it with this high-level overview, but there are only two articles that I shortly want to highlight because these are particularly relevant for the Engage project and something that we'll look into more into depth in the coming periods. Probably also some of the other articles, specifically with respect to renovations and EPC data, but as this needs to come to fruition, in particular on the member state level, it's a little bit wait and see what we will get there. But I want to highlight first Article 2, specifically the definition of a mortgage portfolio standard, and Article 9, the minimum energy performance standards. I'll start with the latter. So the minimum energy performance standards, this is a well-contested element of the EPBD because these are the prescribed pathways how to reach the intermediate goals between now and 2050. So the member states will need to do their homework, describe for each country how to get there at certain time points like 2030, 40, 50, but also some other intermediate 3 to 5 year intervals, how they basically do the uptick in the residential renovations. It's very much a compromise because the original wording was that certain label categories would be phased out. So that was the original wording. So by 2030, no more level EPCs of Class D or below, and basically linearly progress across the EPC skills every 3 to 5 years. But this has been watered down. So there's no minimum energy performance level in practice, even though it's called this way. But there are now standards on the average primary use. So what we have now in the final wording, it should be decreased gradually, should be decreased by at least 16% compared to 2020 by 2030. It should be further decreased before 2035 and further in 2040. And this is very much based on averages on the overall residential builder stock. And there's not a minimum. So yeah, there's a lot more left to the individual member state. So the question becomes, how to do this? And there are a lot of tools that are provided. One of the more interesting one for the Engage project is Article 17. So the minimum energy performance standards will need to be, which are basically, well, you could call it gradually forced renovations, although it's not called that way, but that's what it amounts to. You could say that one of the more interesting tools from our perspective is that it's now tied to Article 17. And in Article 17 is basically the financial toolkit that member states will need to implement as a supporting mechanism for Article 9. So just to list a few of the elements of Article 17. So provide appropriate financial measures, so promoting energy efficient mortgages, providing technical assistance in the forms of one-stop shops, could be physical, could be digital. Integrated financing schemes for deep renovations or stage renovations. Goes too deep maybe to discuss that all currently. And also some other elements, but I highly encourage everyone to have a look at it, because basically the renovations are also to be tied towards financial incentives. And that brings me to what is one of the elements for the renovations. How should this be done? And basically it's a little bit of a maze. But what I would encourage everyone to look at is some of the articles that prescribe how the renovations will need to be carried out in the member states. So basically, member states will need to implement a new renovation framework described in Article 5. So there are minimum energy requirements for existing buildings if you're going to perform a renovation. But there's also an updated method of calculating the energy performance of buildings. So you see there are multiple elements, multiple wheels we are turning now. So the energy requirements, but also the way how we measure the energy performance. So here we made a reference to the relevant articles that we think are also in the future relevant for us. And last one is mortgage portfolio standards. Now, it's not entirely clear what this is, because only a definition is given, but let's say not a lot of detail is given in this definition. So in Article 2.39, mortgage portfolio standards are mentioned. So a mechanism to incentivize mortgage lender to increase the median energy performance. We have found some papers published by AVIG. I put the source where I copied these pictures from in the slide here as well. But basically, it's the idea that you would increase the median energy level in a certain portfolio of mortgages. So we must say it probably brings up more questions than answers. We have understood that the Commission will publish a consultation for a delegate act on how this could be implemented, and it's also probably on a voluntary basis. So probably not too much weight should initially be given to it, but it's definitely interesting to follow the developments here. With this, I want to wrap it up. What I wanted to say as a closing remark, I wanted to give you a very short overview on what is in the EPBD4, and it is a lot, and there's a lot of homework for member states to implement, which has an effect on energy performance, the method, the available data, the definitions, but also on more macroeconomic levels, the basically gradual renovation of the building stock. But if we go all the way back to the beginning, we must remember that there is a direct link with the EU taxonomy. So currently, the EU taxonomy refers to EPBD 3, and the technical screening criteria do as well. But as you can see with now the new EPBD 4 that has been published on the 12th of April, of course, it's very likely that the technical screening criteria, once they are updated, and they are scheduled to be updated this year, because they are now active for 3 years and they should be updated in the 3rd year, that they must be brought in line with the new EPBD4. So I think that's a very important closing remark that I want to remind everyone of, that there is this direct link between the two. Now the Commission will need to update the Climate Delegate Act to bring it more in line with the new Energy Performance for Building Directive. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. This clearly it's a very technical, but and as Vincent was mentioning, there are still a lot of let's say homework to be done from the member states. Now, I think we can spend some time with Gianluca regarding the engaged templates, and in particular the sample files, so that he can basically explain how to provide the sample files and how these have been built as part of the Engage for ESG initiative.
So thanks a lot, Marco. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Perfect. I'll first start with the presentation. And then we will move into the Excel file, but also the sample file. So forgive me if, let's say, you will see these things with a bit of delay, but obviously I'll speak slow. Okay. So after this very technical session, we want to, let's say, come back to the Engage templates. And this is basically the big overview of what we have now. So as Marco mentioned at the beginning, the first pillar of this Engage template is the ESMA template. You might know that the residential mortgages have the Annex 2 as basically loan by loan tape that let's say everyone that wants to do a securitization needs to provide. But at the same time, we know that with Engage templates, we are trying to, let's say, include more data points regarding the building on the energy performance. That's why we have two sections, one related to the, let's say, more quantitative information and one more related to the qualitative information. And these two sections are based on the Climate Delegate Act. So what we did was read the Climate Delegate Act and transport some of the information in this document into data points. As Vincent mentioned before, some of, let's say, the key points of the Climate Delegate Act for buildings are the Article 7.1 and 7.7 part, let's say 1, 7.7 top 15 criteria, and the other one is the 7.1. So basically, just to let's say avoid these articles, the distinction of this article, we can summarize that one part of, let's say, of the Climate Delegate Act asks you to check first, and here I'm in the left part of the slide, when the building permit was, let's say, was issued, and if this building permit for the building obviously was built as is given before 31st December 2020, then you have to follow two criteria. The first is checking if the EPC is equal to A or not regarding your building, or you can use an alternative criteria that we call the top 50%. So you have to check if your building, the energy performance certificate of the building is in the top 50% criteria of, let's say, the building stock in your let's say country or in your regional area. And this is basically one block of the criteria. So APC equal to A or top 50% criteria. But if we are talking about a more recent building, obviously what is key is always something that Vincent mentioned before. So the NZEB criteria. So you should check if the primary energy demand of your building is lower, at least of the 10% of the based on the NZEB. So basically, your primary energy demand should be lower than the 10% of the NZEB. And this is just to give you an overview. All of these elements are stated in the Climate Delegate Act, and we, as a, let's say, Engage, we have translated into the data points. And this is something that now I'm going to show you. So if we now move here into the Excel file, this is an element that obviously you have in case you decided to use the Engage template. You can clearly see that here in the we call building block 1, so basically the Engage part of the template. You can see the data points that we ask, and how can you understand which data points are, let's say, relevant for your criteria. You can simply go here and use this filter to select the information that is relevant for you. So just to give you an example, if we want to, let's say, see which data points are relevant for the 7.1 article, so this concept of the primary energy demand lower at least 10% of the NZEP, we can go here, we can select N, and you immediately see which data points, according to, let's say, our understanding, are required to check the alignment of, let's say, your building with the Climate Delegate Act. And obviously, this is something, let's say, quite that save a lot of time to banks, or in general to everyone that wants to use these templates. So you have a clearer guidance. Here you have the field, you have the description, and some and the options. Why? Because not all fields, let's say, are relevant for all three criteria. For example, here we are talking about the 10% criteria, and you see that it is marked with N, so N means optional. But for the top 50 criteria, this information is not relevant. That's why we mark it with Y. So this is how you should navigate through into the template. Okay, having said that, we now come back to the presentation, and now we focus on the sample file. So before showing you the sample file, I think it makes sense spend a bit of time on the let's say concept behind let's say the sample file. So at first we know that a pool of loan can be securitized and not securitized. So this is the first distinction that you should let's say remember. So if you want to let's say upload loan by loan for loan securitized, it's very simple. Why? Because we imagine that you are already familiar with the ESMA taxonomy. That's why, and now I come back to the template. For you, it's not, let's say, a new concept, this part. So these data requirements, I'm quite sure you know. But obviously, if we are talking about to a pool that is not securitized, most of this information is probably that you don't have. That's why we decided to come up with a subset of information that you can see here in column L. So if you want to use the template, but you don't have any experience with securitization, obviously you don't have to fill out all the ESMA annex, but just one part of it. And you can see here, so column L, you filter with Y, and then you immediately understand which data points you should provide. And I can guarantee you that all of these points are something, let's say, already available in your system. Maybe you have to, let's say, spend a bit of time in translating, let's say, some data points into, let's say, a couple of specifications that you can read in the description of the file of the field. But it's something that you have. I can give you just an example: the origination date of the loan, the maturity date, the original balance, the current balance. So this is really a minimum level information. And why we ask this information? Simply to give a bit of flavor about the portfolio. Because after, let's say, the submission of the data, the Engage portal will provide you a very, let's say, nice and detailed report about your portfolio. Not only for, let's say, the alignment with the Climate Delegate Act, that obviously is the core part, but also some statistic of your portfolio. And we think it's relevant. That's why we have also we ask a subset of information for a pool that are not securitized. Okay. Having said that, so this first distinction, we now, let's say, dive a bit into the, let's say, annex or in the 4 parts of the Engage template. So the first part is basically the loan part. So you can see here, it's basically all the information that you can see here. So building block 0, that basically stands for the ESMA templates, underline exposure part, and this is basically the loan part. After that, we have the collateral section that basically is exactly what you can see here. So basically the information, obviously, about your building. And we decided to keep the same logic and the same structure of the ESMA templates. But obviously, if you're talking about a securitized pool, you should, let's say, provide all of the information. But I'm quite sure you already have this. If you're talking about obviously a not securitized portfolio, just a subset that you can obviously identify with, by filtering in the column L. And this is the core part of the ESMA templates. So building block 0 loan and building block 0 collateral. Then we have the engage part. So for the engage part, you can go here. You can simply filter for the building block 1. And here you can navigate through the taxonomy. We have two parts. One, as I said at the beginning, it's more quantitative, and basically it's the part where we ask information. To give you an idea, we have the construction permit application date, something that I mentioned before, the EPC value, A, B, C, D, with the, let's say, based on how this EPC is displayed in your specific country. Then we have the issue date of the EPC, the validity length of the EPC. Then we ask also, just go quickly, but on the most relevant point, like the NZEB threshold, the primary energy demand of the building. So as you might know, as you know for sure, these are the core part of the ESG information of the building. And exactly in this part we have the quantitative information. And then, as you can see in the presentation, we have the governance file that we classify as the part where you can describe, so the qualitative part. And this is perfectly, let's say, it fits perfectly for the top 50% criteria. So where you have to detail a bit the study that has been conducted to prove that your building belongs to the top 15, let's say, building stock of the regional level. So as you can see, there are some information. But obviously, if you decided to select this criteria, I'm quite sure that you will have this information. Okay. Having said that, I guess there is just one point that we are still missing. So where are the templates? So the templates are here. So maybe we can start exactly with the not securitized. So basically, this is the loan tape that we will provide to you, and it's the loan tape that you have to fill out. So it's a normal Excel file, CSV format, with one-to-one reported information that you can see in the Engage taxonomy. So for each point, you have to follow obviously the guidance that you have here and provide information. So it's a loan by loan. That's why I don't have to, let's say, stress the fact that we need information for each loan. But as you can see, you can navigate. In this example in particular, we are talking about a not securitized pool. That's why there are a lot of ND5. But the core information, as I said before, needs to be provided. For example, current balance and original balance. These are just, let's say, dummy value, obviously, just to provide examples. And this is basically the same concept that we have for the collateral. So loan part and collateral, ESMA part are basically this. Now we go into the engage part. So here we are talking about the quantitative part, and here we have three lines, so three buildings. So this first building, let's say, belongs to the concept of the to the concept of the primary energy demand lower at least 10% of the NZEB. So as you can see, not all points needs to be provided. Why? Because as we said before, the taxonomy gives you the possibility to navigate and select the data points relevant for checking this criteria. That's why also in the sample file, you will see a one-to-one match. Exactly. For the first line, we are talking about this 10% primary general lowered of the 10% of the NZEP. Here we have the other concept, so the concept of the EPC equal to A. And as you can see here, some data points are not relevant because here we are talking about a different concept. And the same is for the latest line. For this building, we don't check any primary energy demand. We don't check any EPC value. Why? Because we use just the top 50 criteria. That's why this part needs to be filled out. So building unit top 50% indicator, yes. So this means that we are using this criteria, and also the corresponding information. This is the qualitative part that, as I said, it's strictly connected with the top 50% criteria. And as you can see, I mean, here you can see some information how this annex should be filled out. And having said that, I think these templates are now, I hope that the templates concept of the engage initiative are much more clear.
So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day, and please register for the upcoming webinar. It's on the 29th of May at 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you to everyone, and have a good evening.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.